The wonderful thing is when I watch you and you have moments like, you know, a crocodile coming at you or you meet a Komodo dragon for the first time, you don't seem to be fazed. Did you realise early on that you were not afraid? You were much more enthralled than ever showing any fear.
I am afraid.
Oh.
But the camera's on the animal. And the bit where, you know, you've got these binoculars looking straight at the camera, that sort of thing, you know, the animal's not there. That's you cut in, you see. So you haven't seen me saying, oh, my God.
Look at the size of that dragon. Oh, Lord. Well, we've actually got a clip from ZooQuest. Shall we have a look?
Very well.
The locals recommended that we should use a dead goat as bait. Once in the bush, we began to build a trap using materials gathered from nearby, as I recorded in my journal.
And now, all we had to do was to wait.
That's a shot.
There was a rustle in the bush, and there was the dragon. Our first sight of this magnificent monster. And down came the door. Hastily, we piled boulders on the door so that he couldn't lift it up. We'd got him.
Oh, wonderful. But you can hear how everybody's going, oh. I mean, this looks slightly terrifying. There's many wonderful shots of you hiding behind bushes. I like that.
Yeah, well, that's the one. Those, fortunately, the audience has got wise to this sort of thing.
Right.
So you don't see that anymore. That's very much a period shot of the 50s. Looking straight at the camera and pretending you're looking at a dragon, you know.
I think it's a shame. I think we should do a film of you just behind different bushes around the world.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of that, yeah.
There was a brief hiatus for you from presenting, because in 1965 you were appointed as controller of the newly launched BBC2. You were responsible for all sorts of experimental commissions, I suppose Monty Python.
Yes.
And Kenneth Clarke's Civilization, not to mention first regular colour broadcasts in Europe. So I just want to talk about the snooker just for a brief minute, because I was made to watch this as a child, but my grandparents didn't have a colour television. It was because you had some spare colour televisions that you decided to put the snooker on. Is that true?
Well, it is true that we hadn't put snooker on television at all because of the problem of seeing it in colour.
Yeah.
And what is equally true is that we had very few colour cameras, believe it or not. We were very short of equipment. And with just 3 cameras, you could, and a snooker board, table, which you know how big that is, you could get hours and hours and hours of television. I remember talking to the commentators for the first one, and I said, of course, I mean, we're doing this because of colour, but a number of people with colour televisions, it's very small. So I said, look, you'll have to guide the people who are watching it in black and white. And he said, yes, of course, I do understand. So I think it was the very first or the second programme in which he actually had this rather breathy delivery, you know, and he used to say, oh, no, he's going to go for the pink. And for those of you who've got black and white sets, the pink is next door to the green.
I have to tell you, my father, who was Danish, was baffled by this kind of broadcasting. He just didn't understand it at all. How did you take to being in charge of a channel? I mean, presumably, were you able to make programmes at the same time?
No, not with Arm 2. But it was absolutely blissful. I mean, you were kind enough to mention some titles which were successful. But the whole point about BBC Two was that it was experimental and that we would not do any programme. What I said at the beginning was, we will do no programmes that are black and white carbon copies of what's on black and white. People will turn on the set and they will know immediately that that's BBC Two, just from content. And I don't want any repetition of what's on other networks. So that we did just new things all the time. Now, people say, oh, frightfully brave that was, but it wasn't actually, because the number, BBC Two, people forget, BBC Two, you had to buy a new set in order to see BBC Two. If you had BBC One, it was 405 lines. BBC Two was on 625, and you had to do a great clunking switch to go which one other. And so BBC Two had a very odd audience, but we appealed to it on the grounds that it was different. And if it wasn't interesting, people didn't turn over.
But it must have been hugely exciting because, I mean, today a lot of television is decided by committees, but presumably you could have had an idea in the bath and think, oh, we'll make that.
Oh, frequently. No, really. Yeah, really. Absolutely.
And is it true that you did actually get rid of an animal while you were the controller of BBC Two? Because did you not get rid of the mascot? There was was the kangaroo and her Joey called Custard, I think it was.
Yeah, yes.
Did you you got rid of the kangaroo?
Yes, it was all over the notepaper, I remember. I mean, there was an embossed kangaroo, and I was given this as Network's notepaper, and I looked at the programs for kiddies, you know, and I said, I won't see it anymore. I don't want to do that. We're a grown-up network.
I don't know if it's true. I mean, I don't know if were you there for the opening of BBC Two at Alexandra
No,
Palace?
I only took it over when it was 11 months old, just less than a year old.
Because I think on the opening night they got a real kangaroo, and the lights all went out and it got stuck in the lift. Classic BBC story, I think. So did you continue, because of you have a passion for natural history, were you able to continue to commission programmes while you were in charge?
Yes, I commissioned a series that was called The World About Us. It then became The Natural World and one thing and another, and it's still running, actually. And you wouldn't believe how funny television was in the 50s, you know. There was no 1 hour, 50-minute documentary of any kind on BBC One or ITV. And so BBC Two, one of the pioneering things did, it would start a tradition of showing 50-minute programmes. So we made all kinds of, I remember one of the things we made in the documentary series, it was called One Pair of Eyes. And it was deliberate that, in fact, you took someone who had a balmy idea of some sort and allowed him to have a producer and cameraman and so on, and make a programme about what he thought you should do about bullfighting or in support of it. You know, or whatever, something odd. And there was no 1 hour documentary on BBC One. So it was a thrilling time.
And do you bemoan the loss of that? That slightly more maverick time?
Well, yes, it was fun. But nothing stays the same, and it can't remain the same. And that was that particular moment in television in which had this sort of champagne feel to it.
Well, let's have a look at some of the programmes that you went on to make after your role at BBC Two.
The South American rainforest, the richest and most varied assemblage of life in the world. Those are howler monkeys up there. There are around 50 different kinds of monkeys in these forests. As soon as the males see a movement in the eggs, they will, apparently, eat them. Each male may take a dozen or so, but he doesn't swallow them. Instead, they go into his vocal sac that runs down the front of his throat. And there they develop and wriggle. After some weeks, their extraordinary vocal pregnancy comes to an end. And here is that amazing birth once again, in slow motion. A crab like this is carrying about 100,000 eggs, and she has to shed them directly into the sea if they are to hatch. But that's a hazardous business for her, because although her far distant ancestors came from the sea, she herself is a land crab, and she can't swim. So if a wave sweeps her away, she will assuredly drown. But nonetheless, her compulsion to launch the next generation is irresistible. I am walking across what was once the bed of that river, and above me rises the biggest dam ever built by man. It contains enough concrete to construct a whole city to house 4 million people. It will make a lake which will stretch upstream for 140 kilometres.
To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. Now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
And it's very, very rare that there is any violence within the group. So it seems really very unfair that man should have chosen the gorilla to symbolise all that is aggressive and violent, when that's the one thing that the gorilla is not, and that we are.
I have to say, David, watching that frog giving birth, there's not a woman in the room that's not thinking, I'm so glad nature didn't give me that form of reproduction. It's very unpleasant. What do you feel like when you see your younger self? Do you think you could possibly have predicted not just the scale of all the work that you've done, but the impact that it has had?
No, you had no idea, really. And to start with, of course, you didn't, because in the 50s, it was a minority thing. I mean, the number of sets that people had was very small. But it grew and it grew and it grew. And so you got used to it, I suppose.
I mean, in 2011, you broke the record for the most viewed natural history programme with Frozen Planet. 2016, you broke it again with Planet Earth 2. I don't know how you feel about beating your own records. It's like Mo Farah running against himself.
Well, of course, natural history programmes aren't made in the way that we made those. Even Life on Earth was a comparatively small unit. I mean, Blue Planet 2, there were 50 people, you know, working on it. Directors, several directors, and 20 cameramen, editors, and so on. And so it's a very big deal now. And my responsibility is entirely with the words now on that particular series. In that I write the commentary and record the commentary. But the shaping of the programme, the credit for that, which I regard as great. I mean, I think they're marvellously put together, and it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those people who did that. And because my face and voice is associated with it, I get all the credit, you know.
Well, how nice.
Well, oh yes, but you know, uncomfortable really. You know, I mean, everybody thinks I made Blue Planet 2. I didn't make Blue Planet 2. James Honeyborn made Blue Planet 2. The whole group of them.
Sure, but I think you're being modest about your contribution. What's astonishing is the age bracket, sort of 16 to 34. I mean, much more popular than X Factor or any of the reality shows, Love Island or any of those things. What do you put it down to?
I put it down
to that age group.
Well, because kids, I mean, small children are riveted by the natural world. It's something in us. We're a part of it. Kids know that. They look at these things. It's alive. How does it breathe? What does it feed on? How does it produce its babies? And once that's in your mind, you can't get rid of it. And the people, it's such a privilege to make these programs, because I get a lot of letters, but I might get a letter from a 7-year-old saying, I love that, this, that, and the other. But I can equally well, the next letter could be from a professor of 75 who said, I'm very interested in that particular action. How did you get the shot and what does it mean? Because for every single one of us, at any time in our lives, there are things you don't know about the natural world. And it's beautiful. It's unpredictable. It tells you things you didn't know. It doesn't try and sell you anything. And it doesn't ask for your vote. Now, what more do you want from a television program?